This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
On today's episode of Leap Forward, we're joined by Graeme, a seasoned leader in automotive retail and the CEO of Eden Motor Group. Starting his career in dealership operations, Graeme climbed the ranks to become a prominent figure in the industry. Today, he's at the forefront of navigating key shifts like electric vehicles, evolving customer expectations, and the challenges of a fast-changing market. Graeme shares his journey, valuable leadership insights, and advice for thriving in an increasingly complex landscape. Let's dive in. So I'm absolutely delighted to have with me on the Leap Forward podcast today, Graeme Potts. Graeme, hi. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. It's great to meet you and great to be part of this podcast.
For those that don't know you, briefly introduce yourself and the business. Tell us all about that.
Okay, well, I'm the CEO and the principal shareholder of a retail motor group called Eden Motor Group. We're 20 outlets, about 300 million turnover, and just over 600 people working in the business. I'm from the north of England originally, but I've been on missionary service in the southeast now for 25 years. And I am a 40-year plus veteran of the retail motor industry, but started life immediately after university with Marks and Spencer. So I am a retailer who sells cars, parts, and service hours.
That's really interesting. I've had a number of people on this podcast talk to me about the grounding that they had, the excellent grounding they had with Marks and Spencers. So let's kind of take it from, I suppose, really coming up. I mean, first of all, let's take it from university onwards. The past never linear. Give us a bit of a kind of journey today.
Well, I wanted to get into the world of business. I was from a non-business family, but I wanted to get into the world of business, thought about becoming an accountant. It didn't pay well enough because I needed money in the short term to get married. And so I applied to Marks and Spencer and found that I loved the DNA, the ethos of that company through the recruitment phase. And once I got in, I found that the whole culture of variability day by day, unpredictability, lots of colleagues, lots of customers, really fired me up. And from that, I took a really radical move in some senses because I joined a very, very small motor dealership because I wanted P&L responsibility, not just the formula structure of multi-outlet high street retailing. And you get that in spades in the motor business. And my career has been, for me, very, very empowering, very interesting, very challenging at times, because I've, on 3 or 4 occasions, taken something quite small to something quite big. And in particular, in that first phase, back in ancient history, the 1980s and 1990s, I had to learn so many skills and areas of activity because we were taking a very, very small company through to being a very big company. And frankly, if I didn't do it, if I didn't learn it, nobody else would. And so it's given me a very, very broad canvas. But for the last 40 years, that's all been in relation to automotive. But I've had some turns along the way because building a company that was principally dealerships, then moved into motoring services with RAC, then went to an international company, Automotive, but across many countries of the world. And then, looking back at the moment, you might think somewhat foolishly, but I don't really believe that. I began my own business in 2008 because I wanted to put into practice in an unadulterated kind of way all that I'd learned over the preceding 30 years. And it's been an absolutely riotous, exciting, and overall fulfilling ride.
So bring us kind of up to speed from 2008. Tell us about that ride.
Well, at a time when I was 50, okay? So, having had a pretty decent career in large PLCs, part-time work or semi-retirement or even retirement might have been in some people's mindset, but it wasn't mine. And I started this business in joint venture with Vauxhall, the manufacturer, and we acquired 5 businesses. My passion was to put into practice retailing and people principles that I had developed and inculcated over many years. Their desire was to improve the performance of that portfolio of dealerships through what they believed was a fairly competent executive level manager. Um, so there was no plan for it to be a large company. I wanted it to be a good company, good for colleagues, good for customers, clearly good for returns as well. And it was a real shock to the system in one way because I moved from running a very big division of a PLC with about 1.5 billion turnover to running 5 dealerships that had 65 million turnover and a couple of hundred people. And I had to relearn some of the micro skills, but also apply some of the macro and higher level skills, which I think benefited that development phase of that business. And we were very fortunate to survive the 2008 to 2010 financial crash, and we established the business quite well. And from then on, motor manufacturers and business brokers and agents began to bring opportunities to us, which seemed to make commercial and geographic sense. And so we've had quite a growth since then, as I said at the beginning, to now having 20 dealerships and 1 service centre, um, largely in the South Midlands down to the southwest of England.
What a phenomenal growth story. I want to sort of spend the rest of this conversation talking more about that, really. You talked about some principles there, both retail and also people. Tell me a little bit about, those principles that sort of have stayed true, even probably from somewhat your M&S days, but also how some of those principles have kind of evolved as you've grown as a leader, as the market's changed, as the consumers changed.
Yeah, well, can I give you an anecdote that was one of the early learnings? Um, as a divisional CEO in a large company, clearly there's a lot of seniority and a lot of responsibility, and frankly, many people show great respect. But I was brought up really with a shock when, in the very early days of Eden, my office was upstairs in one of our dealerships, and I didn't like the front of house reception of that dealership. Um, it had a huge desk that, sort of prevented customers really feeling welcomed, and the reception and host people were sitting too low, etc., etc. So this was about 6 or 8 weeks into us operating the business, and I said to the local management team at one of our management meetings, I really don't like that. Let's get rid of it, and we'll put lower level desks in, which are more welcoming. So about 2 or 3 hours later, I was in a meeting with some other people from one of our other businesses, and I heard this almighty bang crash, and I thought, blimey, there's been an accident outside. So I dashed downstairs to find the telephonist had her uh, switchboard on her knee, parked in a corner. The doors of the showroom were all open. There were customers in the showroom, but 2 or 3 of the technicians and the sales manager with hammers were smashing up this reception desk into 1,000 pieces to drag it out of the showroom. I said, whoa, what's going on? But boss, you said you wanted rid of that. And I said, well, I thought we'd do it when the dealership was closed, when there weren't any customers here, and we didn't make a huge noise. And frankly, I'm not sure there's a great deal of danger, but you know what I mean in terms of the public access at that time. And I learned that as an owner of a business, there is, or was in those days, a particularly acute and immediate response to what was seen to be a clear instruction. And and I have quite a consultative and advisory style, although I don't deny being a leader and quite a strong leader. And I have to learn that as the person who was seen as the owner, your word was law. And therefore, style had to change a little bit because my style is to sometimes be, I describe it throwing a pebble in the pond, be a little bit provocative to engender questioning and solutions from the team. And so fairly early on, I realized that if I said we should do such and such, I have to say, do you think we should consider doing such and such? Because if I didn't put the implied question after it, it would have been done. And of course, I'd be the first to admit, as a fairly entrepreneurial generalist, not all my ideas are good and not all should be followed.
It's a great story. And beyond that now, so how I suppose in a sense has the rise of the use of technology transformed your business and your approach to people and retail?
Yeah, yes. I wouldn't use the word transform. I would say that it has developed and amended motor retail, and you may, and your listeners, viewers might think, well, this is just a relatively older, grey-haired guy who's been a bit of a luddite. I don't think I am. I think our sector of the economy still has a huge dependency on personal interaction. Purchasing a vehicle is quite a considered action that only takes place every 3 or so years for most customers. And so, therefore, many private motorists are not ready for a completely technology based transaction. That having been said, probably the biggest technology investment and change that we've elicited is that we have got in-house an applications development team because the auto industry, whilst the technology of the cars is very advanced, quite frankly, the systems base is not. We probably haven't got time, but that's largely because there are relatively few manufacturers, but many retailers, and therefore industry-wide standards and fully integrated retail systems with manufacturing and distribution are not de rigueur in our sector as they are with others. So what we've done is invest quite a lot of time and money in front-end applications to make us more like a contemporary retailer. So, for example, we have something, we call it One View. And quite simply, it is a single view of the customer that at any point of interaction, I or my colleagues can see our entire history with that customer. Now, to some people watching this, you'll think, well, hold on, what's so significant about that? I can assure you that in motor retail, that's relatively, well, it is very progressive compared with many. And so we're trying to eradicate some of the pen and ink black arts of our sector, or at least that our sector is reputed to have. You know, customer rings up for the third time and they have to be asked their details again about who they are, what the car is, what the registration number is. We're seeking to eradicate all of that so that we're much, one of the expressions today is frictionless because there's a tremendous integration between digital commerce, which in our case in automotive is normally research rather than transactions. But nevertheless, there needs to be a frictionless relationship between that digital and online relationship with the customer and the physical when the customer comes to our business units. Consequently, we've been working very hard, and I believe we've delivered a great deal of integration and improvement in customer handling and customer experience as a result of that.
It's really fascinating that you've taken that approach, and I can really see the value. Just hearing from you that you must be creating, and both for yourselves but also for your customers, in terms of them, because that's what they expect wherever else they're shopping.
Absolutely.
And in that, two things, I suppose. One is you must also be generating a lot of data to help then inform, the further kind of improvement and performance of the business. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about sort of, kind of the impact of that data. How have you turned that into insight and how have you action that insight?
Well, without wanting to get overly technical, you are so right. Our business is very, very data driven. Um, One example would be the predictive nature of using data from vehicle sales, the financial aspects of the transaction, and the customer's in-service experience and history to preempt conversations about the next likely purchase. As you can imagine, there are a whole load of variables in there, which the idea of a sales exec with a black book with a few telephone numbers in that they call the customer every so often is for the birds. We are far, far more sophisticated than that today. And we clearly use our macro data, large data sets, to work out typical and average and mean on time to change, affordability for change, etc., etc. But we also use it in a micro sense with the individual customer's records so that we can personalize. And that's one of the key words that I would say is front of mind in our business today, that the use of data personalizes both our marketing and our attempts to resell to our customers, but it also, I really do believe and certainly hope, improves the customer experience because there's a degree of personalization in our communications. I'll give you an example. And again, some people from other sectors will think, "Hey, this is not really progressive." But for example, we no longer would send a message to a customer saying, "Dear customer, we think your car is due a service." We'd say, "Mr. Jones, your Astra 1.4 Turbo is due its third annual service, and this time round, we'd recommend you have the brake fluid changed." Now, personalized communications, we know they have a much higher propensity to be opened. They have a much higher propensity to be responded to. And so that's one of the many uses of data that brings the personalization. And frankly, we do want the customers to enjoy interacting with us, of course we do, but we want to be commercial as well.
That's a brilliant example, and I think as you said, the benefits to the customer really crystal clear to me. The kind of the comparing the like for like in terms of an untargeted, unpersonalized message versus that one. It shows you care, shows you're thinking about, you're helping me take the right next step. It's also empowering and supporting your teams in order, for them to get on with what they do really well. I suppose would love to kind of hear a little bit more about that, because you've kind of slightly kind of preempted some of my thinking around where next, because obviously we've had sort of a lot of talk about sort of AI, and you've already talked about sort of predictability and the use of data. What give us your kind of perspective on kind of where is AI going to be kind of taking what you've kind of just described?
AI is very, very interesting, but prospectively conflicting ever so slightly in terms of what we believe is the correct environment and culture around customer communications. And our view is that AI, as a first interrogative or informative phase, can be and already is to an extent in our business something that would be very, very useful, very efficient, and very well received by customers. However, we go back to the fact that both in the aftermarket and in particular in the vehicle sales market, customers, and I know this is going to conflict with what some pundits say, but in the real world of actually operating businesses with thousands of customers, in the real world, customers do want the personal interaction when it comes to the precursor to a purchase decision or with an issue post purchase, for example. So we're using both AI, I beg your pardon, and other technologies for things like automated service bookings. Some 28% of our customers, when they receive a reminder, which is in their chosen medium, largely SMS or email, or WhatsApp, to quote a trade name, some 27% of them will self-select an appointment and send it back to us. No interaction whatsoever. And we've got some quite clever stuff that then integrates that into the relevant dealership booking system, sends the confirmation, sends the reminder, etc., etc. So for those customers that want it, you can have a seamless, completely technology-based experience up to the point of bringing the car to us. So we're a foot in both camps, to be perfectly honest, and we are constantly trying to discern what the customer actually wants. I'm not very good at telling the customer what they want. And I know some people say that technology-led companies tell customers what they don't know. Call me old-fashioned, but I believe that our job is to discern what the customers want and then to give them, with that flexibility that technology and well-trained people delivers, the ability to treat that customer as an individual in the sense of communication channel, channel to market, style of transaction.
And that's how you get the right foot in the right camp at the end of the day.
That's what we're trying to do. We're not perfect, but that's what we're really aspiring to do.
And I do have to say I do find that inspiring that you're aspiring for that. It's and I've talked to a lot of people inside and outside of this sector, and I think you'd be surprised at some of the advances or lack of that exist elsewhere. So, but what's coming clear to me from this conversation is the principles, the mindset that you've and the culture that you've kind of established inside the organization through your leadership. Tell me a little bit about sort of how you foster that, and how do you develop, those that are part of your team.
Right, right. Well, my personal role, apart from being the titular head and perhaps the figurehead of the business, these days, I want to go back, if you don't mind, just a little bit to my earlier career, because I talked about Eden was very small and I had to relearn some of this sort of the micro things of managing a smaller business. It's now a considerably bigger business, but the scale has now allowed me to move to my um, great strength, well, or certain aptitude, which is the coaching and mentoring of talent. And our DNA, our essence of Eden, as we call it, is largely perpetuated through, yes, a personal presence and a leadership team. And we have an exec group of 8, we have a leadership group of 67, who we're not clones of each other, but the mentoring, the proximity, it starts with recruitment, but it really develops. We have an expression in the northeast of England. Forgive me, it's better felt than telt. And that means our DNA it's documented that we've got a way of doing things, but it's actually an experiential culture in the company. And colleagues and stakeholders are kind enough to say that it is quite heavily driven by my personality and my leadership. But I'd be the first to say that it has iterations that have a very core. We're not didactic, we're not bureaucratic, we have broad themes. And one of the cultures that we coach is it's never the wrong thing to do the right thing. And if you know it's the right thing at whatever level you are in the company, just do it. And that can be, in the short term, can look quite costly, but it's the right thing to do. And so we don't have a multi-page rule book. We clearly have processes, we have policies. I think we're pretty good in financial control, etc., etc. But if you were to have most of my long-standing senior colleagues here on and say, they would say the same kind of things. It's something that is lived and breathed in the organization rather than taught from a rule book. And I don't like to use the word proud. I'm very appreciative of the fact that generations of leaders have, with slightly different iterations, because we're all individual people, been true to that culture in the business. And for example, I still do group induction for every new colleague who joins the company, whether they join at whatever level, from executive management down to being a delivery collection driver.
That's phenomenal. And you really just on the back of that, and you talked about recruitment sort of as part of that sort of that conversation just now, and those inductions. What are you looking for? When you're recruiting, when you're inducting, when you're building that team.
Yeah, well, it would be easy to be very generalist, but I do just need to remind us all that, of course, whilst our principal business is dealership-based selling of cars, parts, and service hours, we have IT, we have financial control, we have marketing, telephony, contact center, etc., etc. And clearly, there is an element of skill set related to some of those specific jobs. But if I was to answer an umbrella answer to that, one of my colleagues uses the expression that for success in business, you need will and skill. You can teach skill, but you cannot teach will. So we want people who are happy to be in what is a retail business. We want people who are people. I know this sounds like it's almost axiomatic, but it's not. And so we look for people skills. We have 6 people characteristics that we don't blazon about the place. But if we're recruiting, we look for evidence of hopefully most of those 6 person characteristics that we say will make an Eden person. And if they don't like other people, if they don't look you in the eye when they're delivering a message, etc., they're unlikely to make a happy collaborator with the existing team.
It's fascinating, and it definitely reminds me of that sort of adage of well, where there's a will, there's a way, right? And so you're at, yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. We have another. I'm sorry, I don't want to pour out too many, but we have a number of sort of one-liners and mantras that help to just wrap around our business. And one of the ones we say in Eden, you're never too young. If you're good enough, you're old enough, and you're never too old. So, in terms of fulfilling roles in the business, we are completely non-ageist, and I really, really mean that. And we have 2 directors who made director level in their 20s. We have a group financial controller who's been with the company for a long, long time, became group financial controller at the age of 27. Yeah, so and we've got some of our leadership team who are considerably beyond normal retirement age and are choosing to stay, do a great job with us, and we're delighted to have them. You never, if you're good enough, you're old enough, and you're never too old.
And when you're obviously running a great business, in a very dynamic and somewhat challenging market, right? There's the changes are constant, and we can talk more about that if you like. How do you think about measuring success? What's your kind of go-to sort of set of metrics?
Right. Well, that could take a session all on its own because
I'll have to bring
automotive
you back for
retail,
another masterclass.
yeah, automotive retail operates with effectively 4 departments. I know there could be body shop and data rental, but effectively, new vehicles, used vehicles, service, and parts are the 4 main strands of activity. And frankly, they all have different and specific KPIs that are upstream from turnover and margin. Um, and so to deliver turnover and margin, the other upstream measures are the things that should be driven and monitored. Um, we and I, as an individual, I'm much more driven by inputs than outputs because the inputs ultimately lead to the outputs. Now, that doesn't mean I don't care about margin and profitability. Of course, I do. But it's the inputs that determine the outputs. So, for example, if I were visiting one of our dealerships or talking to one of the ops directors or general manager, I'd say, how many appointments have you got for Saturday? Now, clearly, Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, when we have some fantastic reporting, but that's by the by. Clearly, I'm going to be very interested in how many vehicle orders we've taken that day. But what I know is if we don't have any appointments, because in our industry, I mentioned a little bit earlier on about some changes in interaction with customers, and I mentioned that digital commerce is the start of the inquiry phase and the information phase for 90% plus of motor customers. Therefore, walk-in customer traffic, as we call it, unexpected, uninitiated inquiries are far, far lower in absolute terms and as a percentage of transactions than ever were the case. And therefore, if you want to drive business, then the CRM, the relationship, the appointment making culture is absolutely vital. So if a given dealership has got 2 appointments for a Saturday, it's highly unlikely they're going to have a very good sales day because we know the ratio of appointments kept, to test drives, to offers, to orders taken. And so I would just to be as brief as, and you can tell it's not my great strength, but to be as brief as I can be, there are a lot of input measures that will help determine what the outputs are.
That's a great answer. I love that. It's a great philosophy to apply to anything. And I love the upstream point as well. That's really fascinating. So we just talked very briefly there about how dynamic the market is. We've talked about sort of AI and various other kind of kind of factors that are going on. What sort of trends do you see sort of in the kind of coming years? You know, and how are you kind of preparing yourself? How are you building resilience or to kind of to seize those opportunities and overcome the challenges?
Yes, well, that is the $64 million question, because the sector is riven with um, difficulties that have been engendered by, and I'm not going to be careful what I say, but politics and environmental concern and pressure on manufacturers to conform to that long-term agenda is imposing a very, very unusual market on motor retail. As I said at the top of this discussion, I am at heart and by experience a retailer. And retailers try to read a market, read customer preferences, and deliver what the customer wants. And I'm not against anything, but above all, I'm pro the customer. And at the moment, we're in the specific eye of a very, very severe storm. And that is there's a clash between the political environmental desire for change of fuel type and the customer's acceptance and desire for that fuel type. Now, it's causing untold problems, shrinkage in the overall marketplace, quite dramatic increase way above inflation in the price of motor cars, and volume decline. Now, that sounds like a litany of disaster. It is very, very challenging. And so we are trying to, to do a number of things simultaneously. I just need to touch back on the whole sort of technology, IT, AI, because that is something that will help to deliver personalization and increase business efficiency. But we also need to make sure, given the customer's clearly expressed preference for physical interaction with dealerships for both after sales transactions, but particularly for the purchasing of vehicles, we need, along with our manufacturer partners, to maintain a physical estate. But we also need to have very credible, very technology driven, very developmental digital commerce. And as other sectors of the economy are experiencing, maintaining both, even at standard, a constant revenue, constant margin, is very challenging. When we're experiencing decline in volume and particularly declining margin, because to force feed the market with battery electric vehicles is eroding both manufacturer and retailer margin. And so that's the real pincer point that we're in at the moment, a technology clash. Whether it's right for the longer term is not my bag. I'm a retailer. But at the moment, the pressure for the alternative fuel world that is coming downstream at us is not being matched by customer demand for that product. And so for the next probably year or two, possibly longer, we've got to try and reconcile those conflicting priorities and remain profitable. And that's the biggest single challenge. Frankly, it's probably the biggest longest running challenge I've experienced in my career.
And and we've talked a little bit about sort of how you're approaching that. Is there anything else that you sort of see as being a huge kind of additional kind of input to that output?
Well, clearly there's the attempt by business leaders to influence other stakeholders so that there's a more balanced approach. And I personally try to play my small part in that. But as far as the business is concerned, we've got a job to do as senior managers. Um, Job one is to stay calm. Uh, I'm not a sailor. In fact, I get terribly seasick. But there's an expression: in choppy waters, you need a steady hand on the tiller. And I know this is not a technology or a commercial marketing stance. It's just a way of trying to give teams some confidence. So we don't deny the realities, but we try as a top team to remain very calm and decisive. And one of the things that we do quite a lot of is not to criticize or debunk anything that's happening in terms of technology development. For example, we've made it clear that every one of our technicians will be trained in high voltage techniques so that we can look after BEV. It's demanded by most manufacturers, but we want to do it anyway. But the reality is that at the moment, 96% of our workshop activity relates to internal combustion engine vehicles. And so we're trying to be contemporary without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so the communication, and we do a lot of it to say, look, we are where it's at in terms of charging capacity, EV skills, etc., albeit as a little aside, new technology gives rise to lots of new types of problems in terms of technology and customer acceptance. But that's perhaps another issue. Whilst at the same time, the day-to-day work that most of our people in our dealerships revolves around what pundits would call old technology vehicles. But the fact of the matter is, there are still 36.5 million of them on the roads of Britain.
And this is therefore an industry that is going to evolve and change and grow through this choppy period, no doubt. Um, there's opportunity every day. You know, rarely a day that goes by right now when the automotive sector right now is not in the news for good and bad.
Mostly for bad reasons at the moment.
But going back to the Graham Potts who was at Marks and Spencer, what's the one piece of advice that you give him, you know, before he was kind of coming into this industry?
Right. In retrospect, I could not have had a better first career than Marks and Spencer. Not specifically because it was Marks and Spencer, but Marks and Spencer was in my day characterized by being very data driven, very granular and micro in the analysis of their business, and a very clear culture that with seniority comes accountability and responsibility. In Marks and Spencer, yes, it was never, not remotely, a democracy, but senior people worked very hard and were held accountable. And I think, people would say we all at the top of our company worked very, very hard. Um, I think I could confidently say that most Eden colleagues would say our exec group are amongst the hardest working people they've met. Not because I'm a tyrant, but because to extract value in a very narrow margin business, there needs to be application and focus on granularity that doesn't normally occur in all sectors of the economy. When a very good margin in terms of return on sales is 1 to 1.5%, the latitude for cost creep or for margin erosion or for unnecessary waste is so important that people coming in this industry from others sometimes underestimate the degree of complexity of the interrelationship of the departments, but in particular, the need for tight control because margin can walk out of the door very, very quickly indeed. And I'm forever thankful that even though it was a very, very big company, even when I was there 40 years ago, Marks and Spencer inculcated those attitudes in its leaders. So my word of advice to anybody considering the industry is it is exciting, it is demanding. You're delivering to customers what's both a wants and a needs product. Most people love motor cars, but nearly all people need them for their lifestyle. Be very aware and ready for the passions that most motorists exhibit, particularly when things go wrong, and realize that it's not a broad brush kind of industry. It's a very granular, detailed kind of industry. And if you want to have an 8 till 4:30 where you are looking at things retrospectively rather than trimming the sails in a dynamic, real-time way, the sector isn't for you. If you do like that kind of thing, you'll have a whale of a time.
Graeme, thank you for joining Leap Forward today.
It's been a pleasure. It's been lovely to talk to you.